The restaurant smelled faintly of garlic bread and cigarette smoke that lingered on the edges of old curtains. The kind of place that had seen too many family dinners, too many apologies that never healed. The low light flickered against the half-empty glasses, shadows stretching longer than they should. I watched her hand move, slow, deliberate, as she reached for her wine. The thin stem of the glass trembled, though her face gave nothing away. She had perfected that mask. My mother always did. And then she said it. I am proud of all my kids. Except one. The words hung in the air, sharp as broken glass. She didn't look at me when she said it. Maybe that was worse. Her gaze shifted instead toward the tablecloth, tracing invisible lines with her eyes, as if she were drawing boundaries between love and disappointment. It was in that silence that everything broke open inside me. There's a particular kind of wound only a parent can give, not by screaming, not by striking, but by withholding the one thing you've been waiting your whole life to hear. Pride. Belonging. A nod of recognition. I didn't answer. Couldn't. My throat tightened, but my hands stayed still, resting over the small envelope in my lap. The paper was creased at the edges, worn from too much folding and unfolding, like a secret I wasn't ready to let go of. That envelope, small, fragile, was more than paper. It was proof. It was memory. It was a heartbeat pressed flat between two layers, waiting for the moment it would matter. I felt her eyes on me then, not with warmth, not with love, but with something unspoken. Maybe it was regret. Maybe it was nothing at all. That was the cruelty, never knowing which. Her gaze lingered for just a second too long, a silent exchange that carried more weight than her words. I lowered my eyes, breathing slow, and with a steady hand, I slipped the envelope into her glass. The red wine curled around the edges of it, bleeding into the paper like a wound opening wide. She froze. And for the first time in years, she looked at me, really looked. No mask. No performance. Just a raw flicker of something I couldn't name. The restaurant noise carried on around us. Forks clinked, a baby cried in the corner booth, laughter burst from a nearby table. Life was happening everywhere, but at that table, everything stopped. I wondered then, is this what it takes for someone to finally see you? To ruin the surface so the truth can rise? The envelope bobbed gently in the glass, a fragile raft sinking slowly in red tides. I thought about how everything precious in my life had always ended up that way, submerged, drowned out, overlooked. And yet, something in me stirred. A strange calm, a quiet rebellion. Like the first breath after almost drowning. Sometimes loss doesn't come as a sudden blow. Sometimes it comes as a whisper across a dinner table, disguised as casual cruelty. And sometimes, rebirth begins not with joy, but with the breaking of something you thought would never break. I can still see her eyes in that moment, searching mine, silent, almost pleading. But it was too late for words. Maybe you've felt it too, that moment when love turns into silence, and silence into something you can never take back. The envelope swayed in her glass, edges curling as the red wine seeped deeper into its folds. She didn't move. None of us did. My siblings sat stiff around the table, frozen in a silence that felt heavier than any argument could have been. My brother Michael cleared his throat, a nervous tic he'd had since childhood, but he didn't speak. My sister Anna kept her eyes glued to her plate, pushing a piece of bread back and forth, as though the motion alone could erase what had just happened. I wondered if they felt it too, the sting of those words, the way they had been aimed but still managed to cut across the whole table. Or maybe they were just relieved it wasn't directed at them. That was always the difference, wasn't it? The golden children basked in her pride. And then there was me. The restaurant's soft piano music floated around us, but it sounded far away, muffled, like we were sealed inside a glass box. I stared at her hands. They had once held me through fevers, brushed the hair from my forehead when nightmares came. Now they gripped the stem of her glass as though it were the only thing keeping her steady. But when she finally lifted her eyes, there was something raw in them. Not anger, not quite shame, just a shadow of something I'd been searching for my whole life. The envelope trembled in the wine. Flashback: I was 7 the first time I realized I wasn't enough for her. It was in the school auditorium, the smell of crayons and floor polish clinging to the air. Anna had just performed her piano recital. Mom clapped so loudly the whole row turned to look at her beaming smile. She whispered, "That's my girl," over and over, pride spilling from her like sunlight. When my turn came, I walked onto that same stage holding a drawing I'd made, a clumsy sketch of our family. My hands shook as I lifted it, searching her face in the crowd. She smiled politely, but it never reached her eyes. Afterward, she hugged Anna so tight her feet lifted off the ground. She patted my shoulder once. "You tried." That word followed me for years. Tried. Never enough. The restaurant blurred back into focus. My mother was still staring at the envelope. The glass fogged with her breath as she leaned closer, as though trying to see through the soaked paper. That envelope wasn't new to her. She had seen it before. She just never wanted to open it. Inside was something simple, something I had carried like a talisman, an old photograph of the two of us. She was holding me on her lap, sunlight cutting across our faces. I was smiling at her the way children smile before they learn what disappointment feels like. She was smiling too, in a way I don't remember her ever smiling again. I used to look at that photograph whenever the distance between us grew unbearable. It reminded me that, once, there was love. Once, there was a mother who looked at me like I belonged. And maybe that's why I brought it tonight. Not as proof for her, but as proof for myself. To remind me that the love I remembered wasn't a dream. Michael shifted in his seat, finally daring to speak. "Mom, maybe," he stopped when she shot him a look. That sharp, unspoken warning that had kept us all in line since childhood. But Anna's eyes flicked up to mine, and in that brief glance, I saw something else, guilt, maybe even regret. She had lived in the warmth of Mom's pride, but she knew what it meant to live in its shadow too. The envelope sank lower into the wine. A red bloom spread wider across the paper, like blood seeping into cloth. My mother's fingers twitched. The air between us grew tight, almost unbearable. Another flashback. The hospital room was quiet except for the rhythmic beep of machines. I was 17, sitting alone by my grandmother's bed. Mom hadn't come. She said she was too tired, that hospitals made her nervous. My grandmother had been the only one who ever looked me straight in the eye and said, "You are enough." Her voice was faint, her skin pale, but her words lit something inside me I didn't know I needed. When she passed, I carried that silence home. Mom never asked me what it felt like to lose her. She only asked if I'd remembered to clean up the kitchen. That was the night I stopped expecting comfort from her. Back in the restaurant, she finally whispered something, so soft I almost missed it. "You shouldn't have brought that." Her words trembled, but her eyes gave her away. There was pain there, buried under years of silence. I didn't answer. My hands stayed still, my chest heavy with the weight of every unsaid word. The envelope was still sinking, and with it, the memory of everything I'd held on to. And maybe that's the cruelest truth. Sometimes the only way to be seen is to let something precious be destroyed in plain sight. The envelope had nearly disappeared beneath the wine now, its edges dissolving into the dark red. My mother still hadn't touched it. She didn't need to. The room itself had shifted, the silence wrapped around us so tightly that every breath felt like it might shatter something. I felt my chest tighten, the weight of years pressing down, but I kept my voice steady. I didn't ask her why she said it. I didn't demand she take the words back. I just watched. Because deep down, I already knew the truth, she meant it. But that didn't stop me from wanting something else. That's the part no one tells you, that sometimes you want love from the very person who withholds it the most. It's like drinking salt water, you know it won't save you, but your body still craves it. My siblings shifted uncomfortably. Michael rubbed his jaw, eyes fixed on the window where rain had started to gather against the glass, streaking the city lights outside into blurred rivers of gold. Anna's hands were folded in her lap, knuckles white. I could almost hear their thoughts. Why push her? Why make this worse? But here's the thing, sometimes silence is the betrayal. My mother finally leaned back in her chair, the leather creaking beneath her weight. She let out a breath that sounded more like a sigh than a word. You think I don't know what you're doing, she said, her voice low, brittle. I didn't answer. She gestured to the envelope, her hand trembling ever so slightly. You always have to prove something. Always making a scene. Why can't you just, her voice trailed off. I waited for her to finish, but she didn't. What she didn't know, what she couldn't admit, was that this wasn't about a scene. It was about survival. Carrying that photograph around for years wasn't about guilt-tripping her. It was about keeping a piece of myself alive when her silence threatened to erase me. And now, watching it sink into red, I realized I wasn't sure if I wanted her to fish it out or let it drown. Internal conflict. Part of me wanted to scream. To tell her about every night I stayed up late trying to earn her approval, every time I swallowed my own needs because hers were louder. But another part of me, the smaller, younger part, still wanted her to reach across the table, to hold my hand the way she once did when I was little and afraid of thunderstorms. That was the war I lived with, the child in me begging for love, and the adult in me demanding the truth. Michael finally spoke. Mom, maybe he's just trying to, don't, she snapped, sharper than glass breaking. The room fell quiet again, only the rain outside filling the space with its soft percussion. And in that silence, something strange happened. I saw myself in her. Her clenched jaw, her desperate need to control the narrative, her fear of being seen as less than perfect. I'd spent my whole life resenting those things, but sitting across from her now, I realized how much of that had seeped into me too. The invisible mirror. I hated the way it felt, recognizing her in me. But maybe that's what scared me most, that I had inherited the very silence that had wounded me. The waitress came by quietly, asking if we needed anything. My mother waved her off, not even glancing up. The table was littered with half-eaten bread, empty plates, a candle burned low, the wreckage of a meal that had never really been about food. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. Our family dinners always ended this way, food untouched, emotions raw, everyone pretending things weren't as broken as they were. I broke the silence first. Do you ever wonder, I said slowly, carefully, what it costs a child to grow up never hearing that they make you proud? Her eyes snapped to mine. For once, she didn't look away. That's not fair, she whispered. But wasn't it? My voice stayed calm, though my heart pounded. Maybe not. But it's true. She looked at me then, really looked. And for a fleeting moment, I saw it, fear. Not of me, but of herself. Of the choices she made, the words she didn't say, the love she rationed out like it was something that could run dry. The rain outside quickened, tapping harder against the window. I thought about how storms always bring two possibilities, destruction or renewal. Sometimes both. The envelope slipped fully beneath the wine, leaving only faint ripples on the surface. And in that small, sinking object, I saw the whole story of us, love hidden, drowning under layers of silence, waiting to be pulled back up or lost forever. The pressure in that room was unbearable. And yet, I couldn't help but wonder, maybe the hardest part of love isn't when it's denied, but when you have to decide whether to keep reaching for it or finally let go. The candle between us sputtered, its flame shrinking and then stretching tall again, like it too was straining to hold itself together. Wax pooled around its base, untouched, forgotten, the same way our dinner lay cooling on the plates, the smell of garlic and roasted vegetables now faint, almost sour. My mother hadn't touched her fork since the moment she said those words. Neither had I. Her hand lingered near the glass, fingers trembling just above the rim. She hadn't pulled the envelope out. She hadn't let it sink fully either. It hovered there, half drowned, like both of us. I felt the weight of her stare again, not steady, but flickering, as if she were searching my face for something she'd lost long ago. And all I could think was, how many years have we wasted like this? Michael leaned back, rubbing his temples. We don't have to do this here, he muttered, his voice sharp but weary. Anna whispered, maybe it's better if we do. Their voices felt distant. The real conversation was happening in the silence between me and her. I wanted to speak, to break that silence. But the words lodged in my throat, thick and heavy. All that came instead was a breath I didn't mean to let slip, shaky, uneven, almost like a sob, though no tears came. She heard it. I saw it in the way her eyes widened, just slightly, like she hadn't expected to witness me come that close to breaking. A memory rose without permission. I was 14, sitting on the back steps of our old house after failing a math test. I remember staring at the cracked concrete, waiting for her to come out and say, "It's okay, we'll figure it out." But she never came. Instead, I listened through the open window as she told Anna she was proud of her latest piano award, her voice ringing with warmth. I sat outside in the cold, hearing laughter from inside, my own shame pressing down like an extra layer of winter. That night, I decided it was safer to keep my struggles hidden. And maybe that's what hurt most now, knowing she never even noticed. The restaurant's overhead light flickered once, twice, then steadied. I thought about how fragile electricity is, one surge too strong, and the whole place could plunge into darkness. That was us. One more spark, and everything could shatter. I finally spoke, my voice lower than I intended. You ever wonder if words can bruise the way fists do? Her lips parted, but no sound came. Because they do, I continued, forcing my gaze to stay on hers. Sometimes worse. Because bruises fade. But words, they stay. She flinched, just barely, but enough for me to see it. Anna's fork clattered against her plate as she stood abruptly. I can't sit here anymore, she whispered, her voice cracking. She pressed her napkin to her eyes and walked out, the door swinging shut behind her. Michael swore under his breath, torn between following her and staying put. He stayed. That left just the two of us again. My mother's hand finally gripped the glass. The liquid trembled inside, the envelope swaying dangerously close to tearing apart. Her knuckles whitened. I thought she might say something then, anything, but instead, she brought the glass closer, resting it on the table, staring into it like it held the answers. The room felt suffocating. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the distant laughter from another table, the rain ticking harder against the windows, it all pressed in at once. I wanted to reach for the envelope, to save the photograph before it was ruined. But something in me stopped. Maybe because saving it myself would mean carrying the weight again. Maybe because I wanted to see if she would do it this time. Would she save it? Or let it drown like she had let me drown all these years? Her lips trembled, and finally she whispered, "You think I never tried?" Her voice was so faint, so fragile, I almost thought I'd imagined it. Tried. That word again. The same one she had given me all my life. A bitter laugh rose in my throat, but I swallowed it back. Instead, I said softly, "Trying isn't the same as being there." Her eyes glistened, but no tears fell. She pressed her free hand flat against the table, steadying herself, as if my words had pushed her closer to the edge of something she didn't want to face. The candle flickered once more, and I realized my own hands were shaking now. I clenched them in my lap, nails biting into my skin. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I wanted to reach across the table and shake her until every wall she built came crashing down. But instead, I just sat there, silent, steady, waiting. Because sometimes silence is louder than rage. And in that fragile pause, heavy with unspoken truths, I knew something had to break. The glass was still in her hand, the envelope floating inside like a drowned secret. She hadn't moved in minutes. Neither had I. The candle burned lower, its flame bowing, shadows bending across her face. I thought we were at the breaking point already. I thought nothing more could be said that would make this hurt worse. I was wrong. She set the glass down carefully, as though it were fragile, and then finally spoke. Her voice was steady now, almost too steady. "You think I never tried," she said again, firmer this time. Then she leaned in closer, her eyes locked on mine. "But what you never understood is that you remind me of him." The air shifted. My stomach tightened. Him. It was a word she almost never said aloud. My father's ghost, not dead, but absent, so absent it may as well have been death. You carry his face. His temper. His way of walking out of a room before anyone can stop him, she whispered. Every time I looked at you, I saw what he left me with. Her words hit harder than any denial of pride ever could. The second twist. It wasn't that she didn't see me. It was that she couldn't, not without seeing him too. My mind spun back to moments I thought were my failures. The times she looked away during my school performances. The times she didn't ask questions, didn't comfort me. The nights she seemed cold, distant, unreachable. And suddenly, I saw it all through a different lens, not disinterest, but punishment. A wound she never let heal. And I was the scar. Michael shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his chair creaking. "Mom," he started, but his voice broke. He didn't finish. My hands curled into fists under the table, nails digging deep into my palms. "So that's it?" I asked quietly. "I spent years trying to make you proud, and all this time I was just a reminder of someone you couldn't forgive?" She flinched at the sharpness in my voice, but she didn't deny it. "That's not fair," she whispered, repeating the same phrase as earlier, only now it meant something entirely different. Not about me, but about her. Her own guilt. Her own brokenness. The time loop echo. But this time, it wasn't me who bore the weight of unfair. It was her. I stared at the envelope. The photograph inside was ruined now, ink bleeding, our faces smudged beyond recognition. The one proof I'd carried of her love, destroyed in front of both of us. And for the first time, I didn't feel desperate to save it. Because maybe that was the truth of us, a love that once existed, but now blurred beyond recognition. I looked back at her. Her eyes were glistening, lips trembling. She wanted to take it back, I could see it. But she couldn't. Because once you speak a truth like that, there is no undoing it. Point of no return. Anna slipped back into the restaurant then, eyes red, face pale. She stopped short when she saw our expressions. Her gaze darted to the glass, then to me, then to Mom. "What happened?" she whispered. No one answered. But Anna's eyes softened, and in them I saw something I never expected, understanding. Maybe because she, too, had carried a shadow in this family. Hers wasn't from our father, but from being the golden child. The pressure of always shining so brightly that no one ever asked if the light was burning her out. And for the first time, I realized, none of us had ever truly been free. The restaurant's light flickered again, and I swear for a moment, everything looked different. The empty plates became tombstones of moments lost. The breadbasket, untouched, felt like a metaphor for all the nourishment withheld. My voice broke through the silence, ragged but clear. "You know, Mom, when I was a kid, I used to sit outside your door at night. I'd listen for any sign that you cared, even just a sigh that meant you were thinking about me. But all I ever heard was silence." Her face crumpled slightly, but she didn't cry. She never cried. "And now," I continued, my chest tight, "I finally understand why. Because you weren't shutting me out. You were shutting him out. And I just happened to be the one left standing on the other side of the door." The rain outside turned to a steady downpour, hammering against the glass. It felt like the whole city was leaning in, waiting to see what would happen next. The envelope shifted in the wine one last time, the paper tearing, fragments rising to the surface like ghosts breaking free. And in that broken paper, I saw it, the truth that there was no going back. Not for me. Not for her. Not for any of us. The stakes weren't just about being loved anymore. They were about whether we could survive the truth of who we really were to each other, and whether love, even if it once lived here, could ever rise again after drowning this deep. The restaurant felt like it was holding its breath. The rain outside roared louder, rattling the windows, blurring the world beyond the glass. Everything had narrowed down to this table, this moment, and me, my mother, the glass between us. The envelope had torn completely now, its pieces floating up through the wine like pale fragments of skin. The photograph inside was ruined, the ink bleeding out until our faces were nothing but shadows. I stared at it, waiting for the ache to overwhelm me. But something else came instead, release. Because maybe the photograph was never meant to survive. Maybe holding on had kept me trapped. I looked up at her, my voice low but steady. "You always said you were proud of all your kids, except one. But maybe the truth is, you couldn't be proud of me, because being proud of me meant forgiving him. And you never forgave him." Her mouth trembled, and for the first time that night, she broke. Tears welled, spilling over despite her trying to blink them back. My mother, the woman who never cried, was crying. Michael looked away, ashamed to watch. Anna pressed her hand to her mouth, her own tears rising silently. But my eyes stayed on her. Because this was the moment I had waited for, not revenge, not vindication. Just truth. She reached for the glass. Her fingers shook as she pulled the envelope's fragments out, dripping red wine across the tablecloth. She held them in her palm like they were fragile bones, broken remains of something that once lived. Her voice cracked. "I kept that picture too, you know." The words landed heavy. "What?" She nodded, her shoulders trembling. "Tucked away. Not because I wanted to forget. Because I couldn't look at it without breaking. The twist wasn't anger, it was grief. She hadn't destroyed my memory of her love. She had hidden her own memory of it, burying it deep where even she couldn't reach. And in that instant, I saw her differently. Not as the villain of my story, but as a woman haunted by her own ghosts, who mistook silence for strength. The candlelight flickered across her face, softening her edges. She looked older suddenly, more fragile. I failed you, she whispered, her voice trembling. I failed all of you in different ways. But you. I failed worst. Because every time I looked at you, I saw what he left behind. And I punished you for being the proof that he was real. Her hands shook as she tried to piece the photo fragments back together on the table, as though arranging them could undo the years. But the ink was gone. The faces blurred. It was irretrievable. I reached out, covering her hand with mine. She froze, then let out a sound I'll never forget, half sob, half sigh, like a lifetime of weight collapsing at once. And in that touch, I realized something. I didn't need her to piece it back together. I didn't need the photograph anymore. Because the proof of her love, however flawed, however hidden, was here. In this breaking. In this surrender. Rebirth doesn't always come with light. Sometimes it comes with the sound of something finally cracking open after years of silence. The rain softened outside, turning from a roar to a whisper. The restaurant felt quieter too, though maybe that was just the stillness inside me. My mother looked up, her face wet with tears, her voice raw. I am proud of all my kids, she said slowly. Her eyes locked on mine. Even the one I hurt the most. The opening line returned, but rewritten, not a wound this time, but a scar beginning to heal. My chest tightened, my throat burning. I couldn't speak. All I managed was a nod, small but real. The ruined photo lay between us, pieces scattered, unrecognizable. But maybe that was the point. The past was gone, the evidence destroyed. What mattered now was what we chose to build from here. I glanced at Anna and Michael, their eyes wet too, their faces softened. For once, we weren't children fighting for scraps of approval. We were just here. Together, messy, broken, but seen. I rose first, sliding my chair back. My mother watched me, fear flickering that I might leave. But I didn't. I stepped around the table and placed my hand gently on her shoulder. She closed her eyes, leaning into it. And in that quiet, I thought of something my grandmother once told me in that cold hospital room, you are enough. For years, I thought she meant I was enough for myself. But maybe she also meant this, that one day, I'd be enough even for the person who couldn't see it. The candle burned low, the flame steady now. And I left the table with one thought echoing in my chest, a thought I'll share with you, whoever's listening. Sometimes the love you wanted all along doesn't come in the form you dreamed. Sometimes it comes shattered, soaked, late. But if it's real, if it finally arrives, you have to decide, will you take it, or let it drown with the past? The storm outside had softened into a gentle drizzle, each raindrop slipping down the restaurant window like an exhale. Inside, the candle burned low, the last curl of wax leaning into the flame. Everything was quieter now, not because the noise was gone, but because something heavy inside us had finally broken open. My mother still sat with the torn pieces of the envelope scattered on the table. She wasn't trying to piece them together anymore. Her hands just rested near them, open, as though admitting that some things can't be repaired, only accepted. For years, I had wanted her to fight for me. Tonight, maybe the greatest gift she gave was finally letting the mask fall, showing me the fragile truth she had carried. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel invisible at her table. Michael rubbed his face with both hands, letting out a shaky breath. You two don't know how long I've been waiting to hear this, he muttered, voice thick. It's like we've all been holding our breath since we were kids. Anna leaned forward, her eyes soft but tired. We were never going to make it out untouched, were we? Her words lingered, heavy but true. None of us had left childhood without scars, just different shapes, different sizes. But maybe scars weren't proof of weakness. Maybe they were proof we'd survived. The waitress came by quietly, leaving the bill without a word. She glanced at the table, at the ruined photograph, the untouched food, the tired eyes, and gave a polite, almost knowing smile before stepping away. Life, I realized, doesn't pause for grief or healing. The world moves on, even as families unravel and stitch themselves back together. And maybe that's how it should be. I pushed my chair back slowly, the legs scraping softly against the floor. My mother looked up, panic flickering across her face, but I shook my head gently. I'm not leaving, I said. Relief washed over her features. Not joy, not triumph, just relief. As if for once, she hadn't driven me away. We stepped outside together a few minutes later. The rain had slowed to a mist, street lamps glowing in the fog, their reflections stretching across wet pavement like veins of gold. For a moment, none of us spoke. We just stood there, the cool air pressing against our cheeks, the city humming around us. Then my mother slipped her arm through mine. Not tight, not desperate, just a quiet gesture, like reaching out into darkness and hoping someone would let her stay. I let her. As we walked toward the car, I thought about the photograph, now destroyed. For years, I had carried it as proof of a love I wasn't sure was real. Tonight, it was gone. But maybe that was the point. Love, I realized, was never meant to live pressed between paper. It was meant to breathe, to stumble, to break, and still choose to rise again. Maybe letting the photograph go was the only way to find the living version of what it once promised. Anna spoke softly as we reached the car. Do you think things will really change? I looked at my mother. Her eyes were swollen, her expression uncertain, but there was something there I hadn't seen in years, the beginning of humility, the faint outline of hope. I don't know, I admitted. But maybe change isn't the point. Maybe showing up is enough for now. She squeezed my arm gently, silently. As we drove through rain-slick streets, neon lights rippled across the windshield, reflections breaking apart with every wiper's sweep. I sat in the back seat, watching them flicker, thinking about how fragile and fleeting light can be, but also how it always returns after the darkness. And somewhere inside me, I felt a small, unexpected warmth. Not forgiveness yet. Not closure entirely. But a beginning. Back at my apartment, after goodbyes that felt heavier than usual, I sat alone in the quiet kitchen. The clock ticked softly. The rain had stopped. The stillness was thick. On the counter, I placed the torn scraps I had tucked into my pocket before leaving. The ruined photograph, water-stained, faces erased. I spread the pieces out on the wood. It should have hurt to see them. Instead, I felt strangely calm. Because the truth was, I no longer needed the photo to remind me who I was, or who she once was to me. I had lived it. I had survived it. And tonight, I had finally spoken it. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the fragments under the kitchen light. They glistened faintly, edges curling. Broken, but still here. Maybe that was enough. And if you're listening now, maybe you know this feeling too, the ache of wanting to be seen by someone who couldn't. The long silence. The late-breaking truth. It doesn't always come in the way we hope. Sometimes it comes shattered. sometimes it comes too late. But when it does come, you have a choice. To let it drown with the past. Or to carry the broken pieces forward, making something new. I exhaled slowly, whispering into the empty room, not for her, not for him, but for myself, I am proud of me. The words hung in the air, soft but steady, like the final glow of a candle before it goes out. And maybe that's the truest ending there is. Backhand index pointing right. What about you? If you finally heard the words you needed your whole life, even if they came too late, what would you do with them?